So after being shipwrecked and brought back to life by a mysterious stranger, our man finds himself exploring the boat that he found himself on. God, I wish my life was that interesting. Actually, no. Because, things don't really work out for him too much. Anyway, to keep on keeping on, Chapter 3, The Strange Face. At the companion was a man obstructing our way. He was standing on the ladder with his back to us, peering over the combing of the hatchway. He was, I could see, a misshapen man, short, broad, and clumsy, with a crooked back, a hairy neck, and a head sunk between his shoulders. He was dressed in dark blue serge and had a particularly thick, coarse black hair. I heard the unseen dogs growl furiously, and forthwith he came ducking back, coming into contact with the hand I put out to fend him off from myself. He turned with animal swiftness. The black face thus flashed upon me with startling me profoundly. The facial part projected, forming something dimly suggestive of a muzzle. The huge, half-open mouth showed as big white teeth as I had ever seen in a human mouth. His eyes were bloodshot at the edges, with scarcely a rim of white around his hazel pupils. There was a curious glow of excitement in his face. "Confound you," said Montgomery. "Why the devil don't you get out of the way?" The black-faced man started aside without a word. I went up on the companion, still staring at him almost against my will as I did so. Montgomery stayed at the foot for a moment. "You have no business here, you know," he said in a deliberate tone. "Your place is forward." The black-faced man cowered. "They won't have me forward." He spoke slowly, with a hoarse quality to his voice. "Won't have you forward," said Montgomery in a menacing voice. "But I tell you to go." He was on the brink of saying something further, then looked up at me suddenly and followed me up the ladder. I had paused halfway through the hatchway, looking back, still astonished beyond measure at the grotesque ugliness of this black-faced creature. I had never beheld such a repulsive and extraordinary face before, and yet, if the contradiction is credible, I experienced at the same time an odd feeling that in some way I had already encountered exactly the features and the gestures that now amazed me. Afterward, it occurred to me that probably I had seen him as I was lifted aboard, and yet scarcely satisfied my question of a previous acquaintance. Yet how one could have set eyes on so singular a face and have forgotten the precise occasion passed my imagination. Montgomery's movement to follow me released my attention, and I soon turned and looked about me at the flush deck of the little schooner. I was already half prepared by the sounds I had heard for what I saw. Certainly I have never beheld the deck so dirty. It was littered with scraps of carrots, shreds of green stuff, and indescribable filth. Fastened by chains to the mainmast were a number of grisly stage-hounds, who now became leaping and barking at me, and by a mizzen a huge puma was cramped in a little iron cage, far too small even to give it turning room. Further under the starboard bulwark were some big hutches containing a number of rabbits, and a solitary llama squeezed into a mere box of a cage forward. The dogs were muzzled by leather straps. The only human being on deck was a gaunt and silent sailor at the wheel. The patched and dirty spankers were tense before the wind, and up aloft the little ship seemed carrying every sail she had. The sky was clear, the sun midway down the western sky. Long waves, capped by the breeze with froth, were running with us. We went past the steersman to the taffrail and stared side by side at the water foaming under their stern and the bubbles dancing and vanishing in her wake. I turned and surveyed the unsavory length of the ship. "Is this an ocean menagerie?" said I. Looks like it, said Montgomery. What are these beasts for? Merchandise? Curios? Does the captain think he's going to sell them somewhere in the South Seas? It looks like it, doesn't it? Said Montgomery and turned towards the wake again. Suddenly we heard a yelp and a volley of furious blasphemy coming from the companion hatchway, and the deformed man with the black face clambered up hurriedly. He was immediately followed by a heavy, red-headed man in a white cap. At the sight of the former stagehounds, who all but tired of barking at me at this time, became furiously excited, howling and leaping against their chains. The black hesitated before them, and this gave the red-headed man time to come up and deliver a tremendous blow between the shoulder blades with his fists. The poor devil went down like a felled ox and rolled in the dirt among the furiously excited dogs. It was lucky for him that they were muzzled. The red-haired man gave a yelp of exultation and stood staggering, as it seemed to me, in serious danger of either going backward down the companion hatchway or forward upon his victim. So soon as the second man had appeared, Montgomery had started violently. "Steady on there!" he cried in a tone of remonstrance. Something along those lines. A couple of sailors appeared at the forecastle. The black-faced man, howling in a singular tone, rolled about under the feet of the dogs. No one attempted to help him. The brutes did their best to worry him, butting their muzzles at him. There was a quick dance of their lithe gray bodies over the clumsy, prostrate figure. The sailors forward shouted to them as though it was some admirable sport. Montgomery gave an angry exclamation and went striding down the deck. I followed him. In another second, the black-faced man had scrambled up and was staggering forward. He stumbled up along the bulwark by the main shrouds, where he remained panting and glaring over his shoulder at the dogs. The red-haired man laughed a satisfied laugh. "Look here, Captain," said Montgomery, with his lisp a little accentuated, gripping the elbows of the red-haired man. "This won't do." I stood behind Montgomery. The captain came half round and regarded him with the dull and solemn eyes of a drunken man. "Well, it won't do," he said, and added, after looking sleepily into Montgomery's face for a minute, "Blasted sawbones." With a sudden movement, he shook his arms free, and after 2 ineffectual attempts, stuck his freckled wrists into his side pockets. "That man's a passenger," said Montgomery. "I'd advise you to keep your hands off him." "Go to hell," said the captain loudly. He suddenly turned and staggered towards the side. "Do what I like on my own ship," he said. I think Montgomery might have left him then, seeing the brute was drunk. But he only turned a shade paler and followed the captain to the bulwarks. "Look here, Captain," he said. "That man of mine is not to be ill-treated. He has been hazed ever since he came aboard." For a minute, alcoholic fumes kept the captain speechless. "Blasted sawbones," was all he considered necessary. I could see that Montgomery had an ugly temper, and I saw too that the quarrel had been some time growing. "The man's drunk," I said, perhaps officiously. "You'll do no good." Montgomery gave an ugly twist to his drooping lip. "He's always drunk. Do you think that's an excuse for assaulting his passengers?" "My ship," began the captain, waving his hand unsteadily towards the cages, "was a clean ship. Look at it now." It was anything, certainly resembling anything but clean. "Crew," continued the captain. "Clean, respectable crew. You agreed to take beasts. I wish I'd never set eyes on your infernal island. What the devil? Want beasts for an island like that? And then that man of yours. Understood he was a man. He's a lunatic. And he has no business aft. Do you think the whole damn ship belongs to you? Your sailors began to haze the poor devil as soon as he came aboard. That's just what he is. He's a devil, an ugly devil. My men can't stand him. I can't stand him. None of us can stand him, nor you either." Montgomery turned away. "You leave that man alone, anyhow," he said, nodding his head as he spoke. But the captain meant to quarrel now. He raised his voice. "If he comes to this end of the ship again, I'll cut his insides out. I tell you. Cut out his blasted insides. Who are you to tell me what I'm to do? I'm the captain of this ship. Captain and owner. I'm the law here, I tell you. The law and the prophets. I bargained to take a man and his attendants to and from America and bring some animals. I never bargained to carry a mad devil and a silly sawbones. Well, never mind what he called Montgomery. I saw the latter take a step forward and interpose. He's drunk, said I. The captain began some abuse even fouler than the last. Shut up, I said, turning on him sharply, for I had seen the danger in Montgomery's white face. With that, I brought the downpour upon myself. However, I was glad to avert what was uncommonly near a scuffle, even at the price of the drunken captain's ill will. I do not think I had ever heard such vile language come in a continuous stream from any man's lip before, though I had frequented eccentric company enough myself. I found some of it hard to endure, though I am a mild-tempered man. Certainly, when I told the captain to shut up, I had forgotten that I was merely a bit of human flotsam. Cut out from my resources, and with my fare unpaid, a mere casual dependent on the bounty or speculative enterprise of the ship. He reminded me of it with considerable vigor. But at any rate, I prevented a fight. Drunken sailors. Best kind of sailors. Chapter 4. At the schooner's rail. That night land was sighted after sundown and the schooner hove to. Montgomery intimated that was his destination. It was too far to see any details. It seemed to me then simply a low-lying patch of dim blue in the uncertain blue-gray sea. An almost vertical streak of smoke went up from it into the sky. The captain was not on deck when it was sighted. After he had vented his wrath on me, he had staggered below, and I understood he went to sleep on the floor of his own cabin. The mate practically assumed the command. He was the gaunt, taciturn individual we had seen at the wheel. Apparently he too was in evil temper with Montgomery. He took not to the slightest notice of either of us. We dined with him in a sulky silence, after a few ineffectual efforts on my part to talk. It struck me, too, that the men regarded my companion and his animals in a singularly and friendly manner. I found Montgomery very reticent about his purpose with the animals and about his destination, and though I was sensible of a growing curiosity, I did not press him. We remained talking on the quarter deck until the sky was thick with stars. Except for an occasional sound in the yellow-lit forecastle and a movement of the animals now and then, the night was very still. The puma lay crouched together, watching us with shining eyes, a black heap in the corner of the cage. The dogs seemed to be asleep. Montgomery produced some cigars. He talked to me of London in a tone of half-painful reminiscence, asking all kinds of questions about the changes that had taken place. He spoke like a man who had loved his life there and had been suddenly and irrevocably cut off from it. I gossiped as well as I could of this and that. All the time, the strangeness of him was shaping itself in my mind, and as I talked, I peered at his odd pallid face in the dim light of the binocular lantern behind me. Then I looked out into the darkling sea, where in the dimness his little island was hidden. This man, it seemed to me, had come out of immensity merely to save my life. Tomorrow he would drop over the side and vanish again out of my existence. Even had it been under commonplace circumstances, it would have made me a trifle thoughtful. But in the first place was the singularity of an educated man living on an unknown little island, and coupled with that the extraordinary nature of his luggage. I found myself repeating the captain's questions. What did he want with the beasts? Why too had he pretended they were not his when I had remarked about them first? Then again, in his personal attendant were a bizarre quality that had impressed me profoundly. These circumstances threw a haze of mystery around the man. They laid hold of my imagination and hampered my tongue. Towards midnight, our talk of London died away, and we stood side by side, leaning over the bulwarks, standing dreamily over the silent starlit sea, each pursuing his own thoughts. It was the atmosphere for sentiment, and I began upon my gratitude. "If I may say it," said I after a time, "you saved my life." "Chance," he answered, "just chance." "I prefer to make my thanks to the accessible agent." "Thank no one. You had the need, I had the knowledge, and I injected and fed you as much as I may have collected a specimen. I was bored and wanted something to do. If I'd been jaded that day or hadn't liked your face, well, it's a curious question where you would have been now." This dampened my mood a little. "At any rate," I began. "It's a chance, I tell you," he interrupted. "There's everything in a man's life. Only the asses won't see it. Why am I here now? An outcast from civilization, instead of being a happy man enjoying all the pleasures of London? Simply because 11 years ago I lost my head for 10 minutes on a foggy night." He stopped. "Yes," said I. "That's all." We relapsed into silence. Presently he left. There's something in the starlight that loosens one's tongue. I'm an ass, and yet somehow I would like to tell you. Whatever you tell me, you may rely upon me keeping to myself, if that's it. He was on the point of beginning, and then shook his head doubtfully. Don't, said I. It is all the same to me. After all, it is better to keep your secret. There's nothing gained but a little relief, if I respect your confidence. If I don't, well... He grunted undecidedly. I felt I had him at a disadvantage, had caught him in the mood of indiscretion, and, to tell the truth, I was not curious to learn what might have driven a young medical student out of London. I have an imagination. I shrugged my shoulders and turned away. Over the taffrail leaned a silent black figure staring at the waves. It was Montgomery's strange attendant. It looked over its shoulders quickly with my movement, then looked away again. It may seem a little thing to you, perhaps, but it came like a sudden blow to me. The only light near us was a lantern at the wheel. The creature's face was turned for one brief instant out of the dimness of the stern towards the illumination, and I saw that the eyes that glanced at me shone with a pale green light. I did not know then that a reddish luminosity, at least, is not uncommon in human eyes. The thing came to me as a stark inhumanity. That black figure with its eyes of fire struck down through all my adult thoughts and feelings, and for a moment the forgotten horrors of my childhood came back to my mind. Then the effect passed as it had come. An uncouth black figure of a man, a figure of no particular import, hung over the taffrail against the starlight, and I found Montgomery was speaking to me. "I'm thinking of turning in then," he said, "if you've had enough of this." I answered him incongruously. We went below, and he wished me a good night at the doors of my cabin. That night I had some very unpleasant dreams. The waning moon rose late. Its light struck a ghostly, faint white beam across my cabin and made an ominous shape on the planking by my bunk. Then the stage hounds woke. began howling and baying so that I dreamed fitfully and scarcely slept until the approach of dawn. And that's it for now. So, what the hell happened? Our fellow woke up after being brought back to life by a mysterious sawbones. A sawbones is an old-timey slang for surgeon. Montgomery, he's a doctor, a medical student. And sawbones, that's an old term for that. Holy shit, technically I was a sawbones. Learning. And, yeah, I know that's kind of an odd place to, kind of end the episode, because not really much happened other than our buddy Prendick checked out the ship and there's just animals everywhere, and that's kind of a weird thing. It'll make sense later on, sorta. And they finally found the island that they were going on, but Prendick doesn't know what to do because he's not supposed to be there. He certainly isn't going to stay on the current ship he is, because those guys, drunken fucking sailors, happen to hate everybody involved. So, spoiler alert, he goes on the island of Doctor Moreau. Who could have seen that coming? So from there, we're gonna figure out why exactly all these animals are involved. Maybe find out what the hell is going on with Montgomery's strange attendant, who we all know is, weird looking guy. That's about it. See you next time.